son got his teacher pregnant and denied it. Now she's demanding marriage or child support. But the DNA test results shocked everyone. I know it's not common to air family drama on the internet, but I really need a perspective on the most absurd situation I've ever faced. I own a few restaurants in my city. Nothing luxurious on a national level, but enough to say my family lives comfortably. I'm not a tech mogul or an engineer, just a businessman who found a niche in the food industry. My life was stable, at least until now. I have a 19-year-old son who's in his first year of university. He's a quiet boy, somewhat shy, especially around older women, and he's never been the type to seek out trouble. But somehow, trouble found him in the worst way possible. Everything started about a month ago. My son came home pale and nervous. Normally, he just said hello and locked himself in his room, but that day he was visibly shaken. Later that night, I overheard him on the phone having a heated conversation, whispering things like, "I don't know what you're talking about," and "I'm not the father." That was enough to make my heart start racing. I confronted him, and at first, he tried to dodge my questions, but eventually, he told me everything. A former teacher from his high school had contacted him claiming she was pregnant with his child and was demanding either marriage or financial support. Saying I was in shock would be an understatement. My son insisted the whole thing was absurd, that he had never been with her, not even alone with her, and I believe him. He's brutally honest and definitely not the type to get involved with someone nearly 10 years older, much less a teacher. Still, hearing the word pregnant connected to my teenage son made me uneasy. I asked him if there was any chance he had done something stupid after turning 18, maybe at a party. He swore over and over, "Dad, no, that never happened." The teacher in question had been a substitute at his school for a short period during his final year, so the timeline was already suspicious. She was older, probably in her late 20s or early 30s, which made the whole thing feel even more surreal. A few days later, this teacher, let's just call her the teacher, showed up at our front door. It was a Saturday morning, and I was in the kitchen organizing receipts from the restaurant. My son was still asleep upstairs. The doorbell rang, and there she was, arms crossed and with a furious expression. She demanded to speak with my son. I politely asked her to calm down and explain what she wanted. She immediately exploded into a rant about how my son had ruined her life and how we needed to take responsibility, as men. Then she dropped an absurd demand, either my son married her or paid a large monthly sum in child support. The marriage part left me speechless. It felt like something out of a bad soap opera. I kept calm and asked her to sit down and explain everything. She refused, pacing back and forth in my living room, throwing accusations about my son's character and calling me a liar when I said we needed proof. She claimed they had a secret relationship after he turned 18 and that it was fully consensual. But if that were true, she'd still be in trouble for getting involved with a student under her supervision. So why was she acting so confident? The whole story reeked of a scam. Still, I told her that if she was sure my son was the father, we would do a paternity test immediately. She responded that she wouldn't trust any test we arranged, accusing us of being rich enough to bribe lab technicians. The paranoia in her eyes was impressive. She threatened that if we didn't cooperate, she would take the case to court, go public with the story, and destroy my son's reputation. She talked as if we had no choice but to give in and do everything she wanted. As soon as she stormed out of my house, I immediately called a lawyer I knew. He told me we had to insist on the DNA test no matter what and document every single interaction we had with the teacher from that moment forward. Legal disputes can be messy, but we needed to protect ourselves. My wife, my son's mother, was furious when she found out. She's usually the most rational one at home, but she was ready to go to the teacher's house and put an end to it right then and there. I managed to calm her down by explaining that we needed to handle this the right way. Meanwhile, the teacher didn't stop bombarding me with messages, switching between demands and threats. Sometimes she acted like we could settle this amicably if I just paid her. Other times she insisted she wanted to get married immediately, as if that made any sense. She said she was about 5 months pregnant, which made her timeline even stranger. She claimed the baby was definitely my son's, but her story about when they were supposedly together kept changing. At this point, my biggest concern was that the courts might take her accusations seriously without a DNA test, or that she would spread rumors before we could clear my son's name. He was just starting university. A scandal like this could ruin his future. I could already imagine the whispers on campus, "That's the guy who got his teacher pregnant." It made me sick just thinking about it. I reached out to the principal of my son's former school, someone I had done business with before. And I explained this absurd situation to him. I asked for any documentation regarding the teacher's schedule when she worked there as a substitute. He agreed to help by providing official records that showed what classes she actually covered, and it turned out she had barely worked at that school, maybe a total of 6 weeks. Furthermore, according to the records, she wasn't even assigned to my son's classes. That was a relief, but it didn't completely rule out the possibility of an encounter outside school hours, which was what she claimed. We investigated further, and one of my son's friends told us there was no way he had been with her on the weekend she insisted the supposed romance happened. He was out of town at a soccer tournament. My son had been a pretty decent midfielder in high school. There were photos, tagged posts on social media, and all kinds of evidence placing him in another state at the time. The more we dug, the clearer it became that her story was full of contradictions. After intense negotiations between our lawyers, we managed to schedule a paternity test. My lawyer insisted on using a reputable lab chosen by the court to avoid any accusations of bribery. The teacher kept complaining, dropping hints that a good check could make the whole thing disappear. I firmly refused. My son started to be visibly affected by the situation, dark circles under his eyes, constantly checking his phone. It hurt to see him so stressed, but I told him, "We're going to fight this and prove you're innocent." He nodded, with a mix of fear and relief on his face. On Thursday morning, when we arrived at the lab, the teacher was already there with her arms crossed, throwing hateful looks at my son. She refused to even speak to him, only murmuring about how she was the victim. The nurses took samples from both of them, and then we had to wait 1 or 2 weeks for the results. That waiting period felt like an eternity. My son tried to stay busy with university and his part-time job at my restaurant, but I could see the worry on his face every time he asked, "Dad, you believe me, right?" And every time, I reassured him, "Yes, 100%. The teacher didn't ease up. She kept sending messages or calling daily with new threats, saying she would tell all the local media how we were covering up a scandal. She even threatened to stand outside my restaurant with a sign that said, "Irresponsible father." The audacity of this woman was unbelievable. I saved every message and handed them over to my lawyer, who was practically licking his lips at how strong our defamation case was becoming. Then, one random night, I received a call from an unknown number. A male voice began shouting, "Stop ruining the teacher's life. You'll regret it if you don't pay." When I asked who the hell he was, he just insulted me and hung up. It didn't scare me, but it did make me furious. It was clear she was recruiting random people to put more pressure on us. My wife wanted to file a complaint immediately, but my lawyer advised us to wait until the paternity test results came in. That way, we'd have a solid foundation to press charges for harassment or extortion. The day the paternity test results arrived was the most surreal of my life. From the start, I had been completely confident in my son's innocence. We had evidence, testimonies, and records proving he couldn't even have been with that woman. And yet, when my lawyer called me with a serious voice and asked me to come to his office, I felt a chill run down my spine. Something was wrong. When I arrived, my son was already there, sitting in the chair, pale and trembling. My wife was beside him, arms crossed, breathing heavily like she was holding back her fury. The lawyer looked serious, with documents on the table. He slid the envelope toward me with an unreadable expression and simply said, "The tests confirmed that he is the father." My mind went blank. I took the papers, read the numbers, the probabilities, the undeniable conclusion, confirmed match, probability of paternity 99.99%. I looked at my son, waiting for him to shout, to say there was a mistake, to deny everything. But he just lowered his head and nervously rubbed his hands. "Son," my voice came out softer than I expected. He remained silent, eyes fixed on the floor. My wife lost her patience first. "You've been telling us for a whole month that woman was lying." He muttered, voice breaking, "I didn't know it was possible." "What do you mean you didn't know it was possible?" I felt the anger begin to boil inside me. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and blurted it out, "It was something from Tinder." The silence in the room was absolute. My heart started racing, my eyes opened wide, I felt my blood pressure rise. My wife held her breath as if she were about to explode. The lawyer just closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. "Something from what?" My voice came out tense, full of disbelief. "I met her on Tinder in my last year of high school. I didn't know she was a substitute teacher. We only found that out afterward. She messaged me, we talked, we agreed to go out, it happened. But it was only once." I felt my head spin. All this time, all those threats, all that public humiliation, all the stress she put us through, and in the end, he really was the father. "So you kept quiet this whole time? You let us go through this hell, spend money on lawyers, lose sleep, and you knew there was at least a possibility?" I really didn't think it was possible. It was just once, and I slammed the table hard. Interrupting his pathetic excuse, I shouted, "You're irresponsible, boy." My voice echoed through the room. "You don't know what it means to be a man. You thought you could play and get away with it. You believed you could just hide the truth and hope everything would pass." He shrugged, visibly ashamed, but I wasn't going to soften the situation. "You deserve every second of this mess we're in. You deserve to be sued. You deserve to pay every last cent of that child support. And if the law decides you should go to jail, so be it. Because you need to learn that your actions have consequences." My wife was just as furious as I was. She threw the papers in his face. "You're an idiot. You made us feel ashamed, exposed us, made us fight with this woman, called her a liar, and now we have to deal with this." My son began to cry, mumbling apologies, but to me, they meant nothing. The teacher's lawyer filed a lawsuit against us the following week, claiming humiliation, moral damages, and defamation. Of course, she demanded child support. Not only that, she insisted the child needed a present father. We went to court, and seeing that woman sitting there crying in front of the judge was unbearable. My son, silent and sitting beside me, looked like a corpse. The judge reviewed the documents, heard the arguments, and as expected, ruled in her favor. He would have to pay child support. When we left the courtroom, my wife was still furious, her eyes full of rage. My son didn't say a word, but I looked at him and said, without a gram of compassion, "I hope you've learned your lesson. Now face the consequences, because I won't save you from anything else." Paying the judgment was one of the most humiliating moments of my life. My wife, my lawyer, and I sat down to review our finances, calculate the damages, and make sure every cent came from the real culprit, my son. Because if he was old enough to lie, to hide the truth, and act like an irresponsible child, then he was old enough to face the consequences. The first thing we did was open an account in his name and transfer the money we had to pay the teacher and her lawyer. He tried to argue, saying he had no money, that he was too young to take on such a debt, but I wasn't interested in excuses. If you're old enough to make a child, then you're old enough to take care of one. He kept insisting that he was in university, that he couldn't pay it all alone, but my wife was as tough as I was. "You didn't think about that when you were having fun. Well, now it's time to face it." We put him to work in one of my restaurants. No easy part-time shifts. He worked the hardest hours, no privileges, no excuses. He washed dishes, cleaned bathrooms, waited tables, and dealt with rude customers. If he wanted to eat, he had to pay for it. If he needed something, he had to figure it out himself. He now had a family to support. And every time he complained, every time he said it was unfair, I only had to remind him of my humiliation. Unfair. Unfair. I exploded one day when he dared to complain. You made me go through the worst shame of my life. You made your mother cry. You made us face a lawsuit, be humiliated, dragged into court like criminals, and now you talk about unfairness? He lowered his head, but that didn't calm me. You lied to my face. You made us believe that woman was a liar. We attacked her, hired lawyers, completely destroyed her credibility. And in the end, who was wrong? You. Who betrayed my trust? You. He didn't reply. He never did. And it was better that way. At first, he still tried to avoid responsibility. He tried to delay the child support payments, said he couldn't save money, that it was too hard to live like this. But every time he tried to escape, my wife and I were there to remind him of reality. If you don't pay, you go to jail. Simple as that. He quickly learned that the world has no mercy. What hurt me the most wasn't the money, I had money. It was what it represented. The fact that I had trusted him 100%. I defended him. I looked my lawyer, the judge, my friends, and my neighbors in the eye and said with absolute certainty that my son had done nothing. And it was all a lie. Worse than a punch. Worse than betrayal. Worse than taking a bullet, because a bullet is quick. This was a slow cut, a wound that would never heal. I spent countless nights staring at the ceiling, trying to understand where I had gone wrong. How could a son raised in a stable home, with present parents and solid values, lie to our faces and destroy everything? My wife tried to console me. She said he was learning, that he was maturing. But I saw the same disappointment in her eyes. He now paid child support, worked, studied, but there was no more love between us. I saw a boy who had been forced to grow up in the worst way possible. And one day, when I walked into the restaurant and saw my son speaking rudely to a waitress, I knew he still hadn't learned anything. He was speaking loudly, impatiently, as if he were above her. Hey! My voice cut through the air. He turned around, and everyone in the restaurant went silent. How are you talking to her? I crossed my arms. Dad, I was just, My voice boomed through the room. He froze. I walked up to him, face to face. You already ruined one woman's life. You already made a woman cry, suffer, sue you. Now you think that gives you the right to mistreat others. He turned red, lowered his gaze. You are going to learn to respect women. You are going to learn to speak properly, to behave. Because if I ever see you treat a woman like trash again, I swear to God, you'll regret it. He nodded, swallowing his shame. Now he was changing, but not because he wanted to. It was because he knew that if he made one more mistake, he would lose everything. In the end, I never fully trusted him again. My son had learned a lesson. But I learned that blind trust can be the worst mistake of all.